Hello Tenno, this is Fen with Warframe Unabridged. Today we are going to take a microscope and examine Hallowed Ground. We are going to compare it to other Warframe powers first, because that's what everybody likes to do. Of course, this is an extremely unfair example, because you should never take a frame's power set, or singular power, or anything like that, outside of the context of their own kit. Doing so, you can pick apart any frame, whether it is the lowest of the low, or the master race of the master race. But just to humor those that can't seem to figure out how to be fair when they judge Warframe powers, we'll go ahead and use their argument, and then we'll use a legitimate one. For starters, Hallowed Ground provides, at base, an armor buff of 20%. Let's compare that to Vauban's passive ability. Oberon has to spend 50 energy to grant his allies an armor buff of 20% if they happen to be stationary. Vauban, on the other hand, can simply stand near somebody else and gain a 25% armor bonus. Of course, he can have up to 75% of an armor bonus in a standard mission type, but the fact that his passive is more powerful than Hallowed Ground really says something. So let's compare it to another frame that has a way to augment their armor, Valkyr. Well, I'll tell you what, this is totally an unfair comparison, right? Right? Is it? I mean, Valkyr is built to have a whole lot of armor, but it's kind of a superfluous buff. The fact that she has Warcry, which at base gives a 50% bonus. Well, that's just kind of unfair. And let me tell you why. You see, Hallowed Ground, it takes Blind Rage, and it takes Power Drift in order to just bring his armor enhancement up to a 42.8%. With the same mods equipped on Valkyr, she gains an armor buff of over 100%. And that's not just to her, that's also to allies. Hallowed Ground does require that you remain stationary, and while you are there, you gain an immunity to status. Does this make up for the fact that Valkyr gets an insane enhancement to the DPS format that she is most efficient with in her melee attack speed? Does this make up for the fact that enemies are debuffed in their speed? I'm sure that you guys will tell me in the comments. Why don't we compare Hallowed Ground to Tidal Surge? Nothing alike, right? Yes and no. You see, Tidal Surge has Tidal Impunity, which is this great mod that makes this very mobile power that belongs to another very hated frame into, well, it gives him immunity to status, just like Hallowed Ground. Only you do not need to sit still. In fact, you could completely stay mobile. This is infinitely more useful because you don't have to worry about people knocking you down on the move, using your great mobility. In fact, using your mobility literally gives you that immunity. It also gives that immunity to all of your squad mates if you happen to run by them. Does it give the armor buff? No. Does it give insane mobility? Yes. Are you invincible while using that mobility? Yes. Does it do insane ragdolling effects? Yes. So there's really no comparison between which one is better, or rather there's no question as to which of these is the better power. You see, the armor buff you get doesn't compare whatsoever with the fact that you are completely invincible while you are surging forward with Tidal Surge. The immunity to status is the same. The fact that you have to equip an augment mod could be seen as a downside to it, but I think that it is a more than even trade for the fact that you could remain completely mobile while using the power. Now, I could compare it to Vex armor, but honestly, that's just a completely obnoxious comparison, because frames like Chroma and frames like Inaros are insanely overly tanky and just absurd. But I will throw out the fact that you can remain completely mobile while getting a bonus of over 500% easily, and in addition to that you get an insane damage multiplier, and the duration is actually much better. As for Inaros and his ultimate, he starts out with an armor of 200 and turn it into an armor of 400 with nothing equipped. So what about Trinity there? Well, let's completely disregard Blessing and how she can instantaneously heal all allies within 50 meters to 100%, no problem, with a 75 damage reduction. Let's just take a look at her other ability that's actually comparable to this one, which is Link. And with Link, you have a 75% damage reduction, and in order to accomplish something like that with armor, you're looking at about 1200, if I remember correctly, which will give you somewhere around 80% damage mitigation. But then there's the fact that she also sends 100% of the damage back at enemies that she's linked with, which obviously scales infinitely. This is largely different from Hallowed Ground's paltry 100 damage per second, no matter how many times you can manage to stack it with an energy pool of 150. Of course, the main comparable thing here is the fact that she is immune to status while this is active, but it's even more powerful because not only is she immune to it, she can actually send the status to the enemy she is linked with. Who else is immune to status, you ask? Well, how about Rhino with Iron Skin? So, obviously this is a slightly different scenario. It's not standard armor, of course, that you're taking into account. We are more taking into account Iron Skin, which does scale off of armor, but it does give you immunity to status, and it gives you an entirely new layer of health. Anybody else with something comparable, you might ask? Well, the only one that I could think of is Metamorphosis, where the armor bonus you gain is a flat 250. I mean, hell, even his new girl Titania has the ability to give immunity to status with some form of mobility involved. But now that we've gone through all of the people that can do this better than him, and by far, I mean, when a passive ability is literally more powerful than your main defensive power, there's kind of a problem there in my opinion. But let's take a look at his own kit, why don't we? Now first, on Oberon's kit, that is at odds with Hallowed Ground, is every power. Yes, every power. Starting with damage, you will always deal more damage with Smite, which starts at 500, or Reckoning, which starts at 1250. To deal an equal amount of damage with Hallowed Ground, you'd have to have 5 instances active, or it would take 5 seconds for one instance to deal the same damage as Smite. So let's look at the armor increase. When we compare it to Reckoning, there's 2 different features that kind of work with it here. The first being the Augment. You see, the Augment gives him about 250 armor when he's standing on an area that is a part of the Hallowed Reckoning. The damage per second also exceeds your standard Hallowed Ground. But Fen, it's such a small area. Well, yes, it is a small area. It's a small area that you have a guaranteed chance that it will be under the feet of everybody that was hit by Reckoning. This alone makes Reckoning much more viable, which means you're going to be producing more health orbs as well. Speaking of health orbs, there's also, of course, the mod Health Conversion, which is going to give Oberon up to 1500 armor when combined with his base armor. The difference here is about 8.3 times more armor, which can be produced by killing enemies with a power that deals more damage than Hallowed Ground. So what do we do with this knowledge? What do we do knowing that everybody, including Oberon, makes Hallowed Ground completely obsolete and useless? Now, it may not seem like I'm an Oberon fan by the way that I've been talking about this, and I want to assure you that I definitely am. Oberon is definitely one of my favorite frames, but this power just cannot stand on its own. Now, some of you are probably pointing towards Hallowed Eruption, and good for you. You found the one way to make this power infinitely more difficult to mod for. You see, most powers have some kind of dump stat. Hallowed Ground normally can be used without a good amount of duration. Hell, it could be used without a good amount of power strength, because you could just go with maximum range and make use of the immunity to status in a large battlefield. Not so with Hallowed Eruption. Now don't get me wrong, this is going to deal copious amounts of damage, but everything that this power needs just winds up causing the power to be spread way too thin. When a single mod can cost you 5,000 damage, or a single mod makes it too expensive to actually make use of due to your small energy pool, or when a single mod that you need in order to do that damage causes the size to be so small that you can only attack maybe 3 people at a time with that, and that's assuming that they don't happen to walk out of the way before the long casting animation is done and over with. Yes, using that augment can easily deal about 15,000 damage to Light Grineer. Beyond that though, everything that it takes for it to become a good power makes it next to impossible for it to really shine. Because if you don't have all domains completely amped up, you're going to wind up with a power that's either too small, loses out on copious amounts of damage, or simply costs too much to use. Well, that's pretty much all I have to say today about Hallowed Ground. My thoughts have been made very clear here, with the exception of how it does still fit into his kit. You can't really get rid of the immunity to status. Of course, renewal does do that, and a good power strength build is going to see to that much easier, but everything else about it is completely pointless. I would say the fact that it deals such a small amount of damage should be mended. Either the damage should be buffed, or the armor enhancement should be buffed. And when I say the armor enhancement should be buffed, I mean by a significant amount. 20% is not a serious buff by any stretch of the imagination, especially to a frame that only has 150 armor. The enhancement of 30 armor is not going to do anything, but seriously, something needs to happen. Well, that's pretty much it for today, folks. If you liked what you saw, if you agreed, feel free to go ahead and give it a share. If you disagreed, feel free to tell me why I'm wrong. I'm always eager to discuss this stuff with a fellow Tenno. Share your thoughts. This is Fen signing off.